Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today we're discussing the music of Elio, the latest out-of-this-world animated feature from Pixar Animation Studios. Joining us is the film's composer, Rob Simonsen, who is mostly known for his work on comedic action films, such as Ghostbusters Afterlife, The Atom Project, and Deadpool and Wolverine. This is Rob's first ever collaboration with Pixar, and he sits down with our guest host, music journalist Jon Burlingame, to discuss how he worked with the film's creative team to craft this very fun, unconventional score full of traditional synth instruments, along with a few musical toys for grown-ups. I'll let Jon take it from here.
We're delighted to welcome composer Rob Simonsen to the podcast. He scored everything from techno thrillers to romantic comedies, with some of his recent scores including Ghostbusters Afterlife, Deadpool and Wolverine, and It Ends With Us. But he's here today to talk about his latest and certainly one of his best scores, and that's for the new Disney Pixar film, Elio. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Jon. Great to be here.
Rob, am I right that this is your first work with Pixar? And if that's true, is the process different than maybe a traditional studio film?
Yeah, it is my first time working with Pixar. A wonderful experience, I should add. And it is different. Animation is inherently different. I got a taste of that working with Michael Dana years ago on Surf's Up. And I remember having to use our imaginations when looking at very early renderings of scenes. But I think the thing about Pixar is their facial expressions. The performances that they are able to infuse their characters with are really so specific. And the animators there, all of their animators are in-house. So going to Pixar, everyone is there under one roof. So you go to this campus and the directors and the writers and the animators and the special effects and all of this is happening under one roof. And it feels like you're in this protected little creative bubble. And so they took me down and introduced me to some of the animators, and I got to see a little bit about how they work. And I have to say the performances that they can give these animated characters are so perceptive. And to me, when I see some of these like winces, when a character's wincing or their eye is twitching or they make a face, it really rings something for me in my own kind of emotional history. So it was it was really cool to be able to just have such specificity in an animated thing, especially. And they also work pretty quickly. So a lot of the things that I was seeing, sometimes it would be hand drawings, but there were a lot of scenes that were pretty visually realized. So yes and no. There's your circuitous answer to that.
So were you brought on early enough that you had lots of time to sort of figure out what needed musical attention, what might need themes, what the general soundscape was going to be? And I'm curious to know what kind of direction you might have gotten from your directors.
Yeah, so I was brought on pretty early, and there was a big push, so I didn't realize how early it actually was. But yeah, when really the meeting was showing me the film, which was fairly well animated when I first saw it, and they had used a lot of my music in their temp. So I felt like I understood what it was that they were going for. And, these kind of large atmospheric textural soundscapes with simple piano, which is something I've done a lot of in my career. And to see those pieces, tempt in, and in some cases tempt into some of the biggest moments in the film, I thought, I really feel what they're going for, and I think that they feel what I was going for in a lot of those musical moments that I've created. So it felt like a really good alignment. And they weren't really that musically prescriptive. I mean, in as much as they had tempted the film and a lot of it was me, but beyond that, they were really open. They're very collaborative. And so I think if I was going to come with an idea, they were always willing to listen and hear and entertain it. And so it was nice knowing that there was a little bit of a sonic signature that was coming from me as I was coming in on the film.
You know, the film is interesting because it struck me as like this grand playground for a composer, because number one, you are going from Earth to this far off place in the galaxy called the Communiverse with all these, you know, strange creatures. But at the same time, we're talking about a lonely little boy who, you know, was having trouble connecting with other people here on Earth. And I'm wondering how you balanced this musically and what these different arenas needed musically.
Yeah, well, the piano stuff that I was just talking about, really, it was clear that this was basically Elio's kind of heart, right? His interior, feeling this loneliness, looking up at the vastness of space, having a hole from losing his family. Spoiler alert, I guess. You learn that in the first 5 minutes of the film, but it, you know, I think these kind of simple things that are reverberating out was a good concept for us to play with, because in many ways the film is about the gaps between us and bridging gaps between people, gaps that might not be able to be bridged with people that we love, that we've lost, things that we imagine that we want to reach out to, like imagining that there's a place where we might belong, a place where we'll be more accepted or have more fun or whatever that is. I think that's a very normal thing. And so there was this kind of idea of a very personal signal reaching out, and then what responds is something beyond Elio's wildest imagination. So it was like very much a dream scenario to say, okay, we have to really cut at the heart with something hopefully very simple, but then what we're met with can be a little bonkers and adventurous and whimsical and weird and fantastical. So yeah, there were moments where we really stripped everything down to just a piano with some simple, almost just reverb at times, and then we, you know, go full bore with a full orchestra. And yeah, I mean, I can't lie, I was having the time of my life. It was really a dream come true.
Was it clear to you from the beginning that it needed to be a hybrid score, that there would be orchestral elements, but also electronic elements? Did that seem clear from the start?
Yeah, although there wasn't a lot of overt electronic music in there. I think that was something that I wanted to lean into a little bit more. But we knew that we wanted to have a signature sound for the Communiverse and space, and that should be a little palpable. So I think a couple things happen. Once we get to space, the orchestra really unfurls, but then we also bring in some signature sounds that we use for the Communiverse, like the choir dolls and a lot more of these kind of fluttering arpeggiated synths. But I really wanted to give the film just a bit of a unique texture to it all across the board, because after all, it's a fantasy film in all ways.
I have to ask you about your synthesizers. I read somewhere that you did use Moogs and that you actually have a Buchla, which is a pretty obscure 60s vintage synth, although maybe for all I know, maybe they make new ones now. I don't know. But this sounded pretty specific. And I also thought that a lot of the sounds I was hearing, I either had never heard before or had not heard in a long time, like maybe dating back to the Wendy Carlos days of early Moogs. Talk to me, forgive me if I'm geeking out a little bit here, but talk to me a little bit about the sounds you used and found and thought applied.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love geeking out about this stuff. So this is, in fact, I have a date with a synth shop here in New York this weekend. But my friend Christopher Ray actually has the Buchla, and he's a great synthesist and has a lot of pieces. We both have a lot of the same pieces. There's a little bit of overlap, but he's gone down the Buchla rabbit hole, and so we do some recording sessions, and he makes some sounds for me, or we'll process things. And then, I mean, the Moog is so iconic, and it can do very simple. If you need a sub bass, there's no better, instrument than a Moog. And you also get a lot of there's some newer Moogs actually, that like the Grandmother, which has this onboard spring reverb and an arpeggiator, and so in and of itself, and it's a fairly small board, but that's become one of my desert island boards, and it just has such a wonderful sound. There's also a newer piece of gear called the Osmos, which is a kind of touch sensitive. You can press a key and wiggle it and give it vibrato. And that was used a little bit. There was another Moog, MG1, which is a Moog that they used to sell at Radio Shack. And it's a gem. If you can find one, they're absolutely incredible. And you can get some polyphony. It was one of the early ones that you could actually get some polyphony easily on. There's actually a polyphony slider on it. But it is a little known gem, and so that's in there. There's a new interesting piece of synth equipment called the Terra, made by Soma Laboratories, and that thing is built to be a mystery. I mean, it comes and there's no English written on it anywhere. There's no words on it. There's just these little brass bumps on it and some things that you touch with your fingers. And really, it's invited. There's a lot of interesting people making synths these days where they're trying to, in the design, get you to play with them and get you to engage with them. And this felt like really a film where it's appropriate to do that. Let me just plug something in and get lost with it. And even if there's no indication of how it's even working, but you touch it and it's like, whoa, that's an interesting sound. And this one it's like a touch sensitive thing. So there was a sound that I was like, I don't even know how I was making it, but you just barely touch this brass little part of it and it blooms really quickly. So it was super late at night and I was just there sitting, trying to barely touch my little finger to this thing to get it to sing just in the right way. And then I touched something and the sound was gone forever. But luckily, I was recording.
Wow. So you alluded to this a second ago, and as again, one of the most interesting aspects of the score is a special wooden doll choir. And I didn't know what this was, and I went looking for it, and I talk about a rabbit hole. This is really interesting stuff. Tell me, number one, what this thing is, what this series of dolls is that you used, and then tell me how you used it in the score.
So they are these robot dolls, these little choir dolls made by a company called Teenage Engineering. And, you know, what I was just talking about companies making really great pieces of musical gear that are invited to be played with, and invite a spirit of playfulness. Teenage Engineering is really, they really nail that. And they've been around for, 15 years, maybe 10, 15 years. And they came out with this tiny little synthesizer that looks like a toy, and, you know, it's colored knobs and all these things. But it sounds incredible and cost $1,000. So it was like, well, this isn't a toy. What is this? And it's one of these things, again, where they, you know, the manual says little, and, you know, it's got its own way of working. And so I really became enamored with this company, and they've subsequently put out all of these great little, they have things that look like pocket calculators, and one is a little beat machine, and one is a little synth arpeggio machine. And everything looks like toys, but really nice, expensive toys that you would want as an adult. And they're a Swedish company, so the design, of course, is amazing. And so during the pandemic, after I had been hired on this film, I came across these dolls, and there's videos of these dolls. They look like Matryoshka dolls, these little kind of Russian nesting dolls. And I saw a video of them singing and heard it, and I just thought, oh, this sounds incredible. They sound kind of human, but definitely not human. So I went to go buy some, and they were all sold out. So I sent an assistant, you know, virtually all over the world, hunting for these things. And finally, we acquired a set, and that is kind of the choir sound of the Communiverse, because the idea of choir felt right. And I knew that orchestra, it felt like the right thing for this film. It felt like it had the right kind of sweeping quality that we needed. But I knew that I wanted it to have something different. So I thought, this is going to be our choir. So then we reached out to Teenage Engineering and shared a little bit about what we were doing. And they got behind it, and they sent us a full complement of another 25 dolls or something like that. So we had this little 30-piece doll choir that we set up at Sony, this gigantic recording stage, and a bunch of these tiny little dolls sitting on music stands, and they don't move or anything. So they just sit there, but, you know, sing. And then one of my assistants, Tiger Lily, she got the programming and then worked in Python to customize the code to kind of unlock the functionality or encode the functionality that we needed, to kind of use them as our choir. So we were feeding each doll specific notes to sing and amplitudes and this kind of thing. So it was really fun.
It's fascinating. And maybe we should explain that the Communiverse is this sort of wonderful United Nations of the galaxy kind of place where with all of these strange and very often wonderful beings from everywhere that have this phenomenal series of looks. I mean, the look of the film alone is mesmerizing, I think, in so many ways. But I love the fact that you found an absolutely unique voice, literally multiple voices for the Communiverse.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of fun, and I think once Teenage Engineering and Pixar got together, I think light bulbs were going off in everyone's heads. I was very, and that was one of my, selfishly, one of my little devious plans from the very beginning. I was like, we should make some dolls, so let's see what happens. But yeah, we're having fun with them.
But there are other characters in the film that perhaps had their own sound, and I wonder if you could talk about the Hylurgs and their leader, Lord Grygon, who are sort of like, in a way, sort of the bad guys of the movie. What kind of sound did they need?
Yeah, it's funny because their characters are I keep looking for the perfect word. It's kind of a bravado that this kind of machismo bravado, and so I went with a choir of male voices, but had them all sing in a bit of an exaggerated, like ho 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 kind of way, because in the end, their posturing is a bit full of just that. It's posturing. So we brought in these 10 basses who were amazing, and I asked for the lowest basses that they could find in Los Angeles, and they put together an amazing group. So there's a little bit of low drums because they're kind of primal too. They consider themselves this very warlike race of people, but they're very soft and tender when it comes out to it. So it's this little like, oh, we're super tough, but in this kind of winky wink way. And that was a great bit of fun. And we just wrote some gibberish for them so that it sounds a bit like a chant, like a primal chant. But in the end, it didn't mean anything.
Well, I was going to say, what were they singing? And now I know. What about Elio's new best friend? Glorden, I think is the name. Yeah. Did he require his own sound? Or is it related to the Hylurgs?
Yeah, he did. He needed a soft sound, so I basically programmed this very. Glorden doesn't really have any hard edges. I mean, Pixar films don't have hard edges in general, but Glorden especially doesn't have any hard edges. And so, I made this kind of innocent, cute, soft little synth sound that kind of bubbles up and plays his theme, and he does have a theme, and it kind of evolves as their relationship evolves, and and I kept it mostly synthetic there, but we still hear a little bit of the choir of the men, because Gordon's dealing with his own issues of lineageship and adulthood in his own race. So.
One of the words you just used was something that I wrote down when I was listening, and that's the word cute. One of the things that really struck me about this score is that everything synth related sounded either fun or bubbly or cute or warm. And I don't remember hearing any score in recent times that had so many simply delightful electronic sounds in it. And I'm wondering if that was sort of purposeful on your part.
Oh, thanks. I often feel that, well, integrating electronics and orchestra is always a challenging bit of business. And it's something that I've been working at for decades, trying to figure out how to do it in a way that feels organic, because it's really easy for it to feel slapped on or feel an afterthought, or there's a lot of easy ways to add electronics, and a lot of times it feels a bit stock. You're pulling up some, automatic looped electronic thing on an Omnisphere patch, and then, whatever, you're a hybrid score. And I really wanted the electronics to feel alive in this and feel that they're an instrument and that they have a place in the orchestra. So I think I'm getting better at figuring out how to achieve that balance in the composition, and thinking, orchestration is very hard to parse out from composition, because, your musical idea might be a texture that comes in. And realizing that at the compositional stage is so important. So thinking about the electronics is a very important and integral part of this. I was considering them like a section in the orchestra. And so the best orchestration, it allows for lanes of instruments so that you can speak clearly. And sometimes those things are playing in unison because you want that color. And sometimes, you want to leave instruments some space so that they can speak. So I was really cognizant of that from the beginning, that they should feel fluid, they should feel organic, they should feel alive, and they should ultimately feel like they're coming from the same place. Not like, here's my orchestra with the mics so far away, and then suddenly you're hearing a really up close synth sound, or so it's the fruits of kind of a million little decisions made along the way about how to artfully make these two things really work well together.
One of the other things that I thought was wonderful was the fact that this score was actually recorded in Los Angeles, on the Sony stage with, I'm told, an 85-piece orchestra, which is sort of great for our Los Angeles musicians, because so many movies now go over to London or somewhere else in Europe to score. And I'm wondering if that was great for you too.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the city has been going through some tough times lately, and that certainly includes the musicians. And I gotta take my hat off to Matt Walker and Tom McDougall and the Disney Music Department and Pixar for supporting local recording and really giving us the resources that we needed, and making sure that this wasn't going to be a rushed process, that we were going to be able to get the takes that we needed. And I really was impressed with, look, I was about to say Disney isn't paying me to say this. Disney did pay me to do the film, but they're not paying me to pay them lip service. But I have to say, their music department and they as a company really impressed me. And I always felt like Disney and Pixar were never holding back about paying people, just putting the funds where they should go. And I think we all get a little beat up out there being like, how, what corners do we have to cut to get this done? And so coming in and really getting this first class treatment and knowing that was extended to the musician community in LA and the recording community was really meaningful.
I always like to ask about the role of Dolby. And in this case, the film is a Dolby Atmos mix. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, do you take that into account when you're writing or mixing or recording exactly where we're going to hear these sounds coming from? What role does a Dolby Atmos foundation play for you?
Yeah, so Scott Michael Smith, who recorded and mixed the score, said early on that we were going to record in Atmos, and that's really the way to do it. And I thought, well, that sounds great, because when you're trying to upscale things and up-res things, you run into challenges. It doesn't quite feel as natural. But if you record it that way and then you can represent it that way, it's really something. And the mixes really sounded quite incredible. And then when we were getting into the soundtrack, I have to admit, I was a little like, do we need to do Atmos? I don't know. And then Scott played me some Atmos files, which, I didn't realize this, but if you have your headphones in and you listen to Apple Music, if you've delivered the record in Atmos, it'll default to spatial audio, which is basically playing the Atmos mix. So we did the stereos, and I thought it sounded amazing. And then he played me an Atmos mix, and I listened to it on my headphones. And again, I am not being paid to say this. I was literally blown away. And it sounded like how it did in his mix room listening to Atmos. And it gave me chills. I mean, I'm not sure what, witchcraft is going on to make it as kind of amazing as it is, but I was really sold. And I have to say, I was very on the fence when I started this project about the record, really, being done in Atmos, but I'm sold. So from here on out, Atmos it is.
Is it possible to say what the biggest challenge of this whole project was for you?
Ending with the appropriate big note, right? Because you have this big promise, and the film starts out so emotionally. It's this one of these classic Pixar moves where you're crying in the first 7.5 minutes of the film, and there needs to be a big payoff. And the temp was a piece of mine, actually, that one of the music editors had really done a beautiful job of blowing out. Shout out to Jenny Rowenkamp, who did it was really great temping job. And I was like, it's that piece again, which has haunted me on other temps before. And I'm like, okay, gotta beat it. But, I think by the time we got there, I just closed my door and locked myself in for a night and did it. But I think that was, staring at me at the finish line, like, you got to do this big thing. It's got to be simple. It's got to be heartfelt. It's got to be big. It's got to be, all of this. And the timing of it, because it's one of these things that needs to get timed out over 5 or 6 minutes and like hit all of these things, but also be, when you set up a certain rhythm and an expectation, there's certain films where it's like there's a sense of inevitability. You're driving it home. And, there's the classic story of John Williams trying to get the timing right with the end of E.T., and he was trying over and over. And it's because timing with music is so important, and it sets up a certain expectation. So when you have a certain rhythm, the body starts to get into it, it attunes to it and it trains it. And then when you do these stops and starts, you can sometimes interrupt the investment in the flow if it's not done just right. So I find that it was the same thing with the ending of The Whale. You're starting where you have to end up 8 minutes before. So I think that was a bit of challenging business. But, sometimes you just sit down and you let yourself be guided by the music. And if you follow that and it's asking for this thing and you give it to it, and then you sit back and kind of look at it to picture, sometimes you'd be surprised. It's like, oh, we didn't hit that thing just as well, but it hits that amazingly well. And so to me, giving space for the music to kind of pull you through is really important, especially in those moments.
Did you save that work for last?
I absolutely did. There were other more braver composers who would have wanted to tackle that first, but I am not. I was not him. Not on this one. I thought it'll be fine, and but and in the end, it was. I mean, that was one that we didn't have to have a lot of looks on. There were a few notes on it, but the gist of it was they liked it. So, yeah.
How long were you on the project, all told?
2.5 years, maybe 2.5 years, something.
Wow.
Yeah. But I wasn't writing that whole time. There was, the film was, it was a complicated labor, this film. And so there was like, okay, we're starting. And then it was, oh, we're not starting. We're figuring this out. And there was quite a bit of that. And, you gotta let the birth take what it's going to take. So then it really was starting in earnest, really right after finishing up Deadpool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well worth the time, well worth the effort. One of the most special scores, I think, of the year. Thank you, Rob, for spending some time with us and filling us in on what it took to score Elio.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Many thanks to Rob for joining us on the show today, and to Jon Burlingame for yet another excellent interview. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Disney Pixar for helping us put this conversation together. Be sure to check out Elio, now playing in theaters and Dolby Cinemas in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. We have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you are subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marrow-Keene. Thanks for joining us.